Why don't people address the bully in the room? Answer: because typically addressing the bully requires courage. Right? A bully's tendency is to immediately threaten. If you don't back down, I'm going to leave. Right? And our advice to managers is never get yourself into a situation where nobody can leave, or where anybody, where you're so dependent on a single person that you can't lose them.
That sounds wise. It seems like fear is a big driver here in general, both on the leader front and on the employee front. Site legitimateleadership.com. Firstly, it's an international site, so you guys are based in Joburg, South Africa. I know that you have another branch, I think, but that's interesting. But your landing page banner says a fundamental shift from taking to giving at work by leaders and employees in the workplace. And there's a wonderful quote here in our latest insights: producing leaders who choose to do what is right. In any situation, leaders' actions can be informed by only one of two things: by their needs or by their values. When leaders act on the basis of their needs, they're essentially putting their self-interest first. When they behave on the basis of their values, they're putting their self-interest second. They are suspending, etc., etc. So, I thought that was a really amazing quotation and kind of embodies what it is that you guys work with at Legitimate Leadership. I think my first question would be, how do you find the climate of leaders in South Africa to the climate of leaders like internationally that you work with? Is there a difference that you see there?
Yeah, Liam, I think that the biggest kind of I suppose takeout from the work that we've done over the years is that leadership has a lot of similarities around the world, a lot more similarities than differences. And of course, there are countries where we operate where leaders are on average in a different place from other countries. But leadership is not so much an average thing, so much as a by organization issue. So you get in, we do work in Germany. Some of our clients in Germany are outstanding. Other clients in Germany, have real challenges. The same is true in South Africa. The same is true in the UK. Anyway, I mean, there's obviously a bias in the sense that we work with leaders who are looking to enable a shift from taking to giving at work. If you are a career micromanager, you're not going to be talking to us about how we can help you to enable this spirit of courage and generosity in the workplace. We go around asking people the question as part of an intro workshop that we run. In groups of 20, we ask people the question: how would you describe the person that you would work for willingly? And what we get is a description essentially of leadership excellence, of the person that people would commit to, that people would support. Hence the name of our organization, Legitimate Leadership. Our view is that legitimacy is really simply a measure of the degree to which people find you to be legitimate, or the degree to which people give you permission to lead them. So we ask people this question in groups of 20. How would you describe the person you would work for willingly? And the amazing thing about the answer to that question, which always includes things like, I want this person to be fair, I want this person to be honest, I want this person to treat me like a human being, I want this person to deal with my personal concerns, I want this person to be collaborative, to hold people accountable, I want this person to push me to be my best, I want this person to be driven, I want this person to, all of these things. It is the same description wherever you go around the world. I have personally asked that question in places as diverse as Mexico and the US, and in Africa, in Malawi and South Africa. We've asked this question in places like Zim and Botswana, in Macedonia, in in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in the UK, in Sweden. I've asked this question in rural India. We've asked this question in China, and it's always the same answer. And there's still two essences from this. The first is I want to work for somebody who cares about me, and as a human being, not a human resource. And secondly, I want to work for somebody who enables the best in me. In other words, somebody who grows me and somebody who helps me to realize my potential. So that is the most fascinating thing, I think, is that the differences are far fewer than the similarities as we go around the world asking this question.
Yeah. So based on that's really interesting. So like, what is a definition of a leader to you and your company? Because obviously that's what you do. You work with these leaders. I'm sure you've worked with some top leaders in certain industries. And I know that you're familiar with Simon Sinek and those kinds of guys. So like, I'd be really interested to hear how you define a leader, and then maybe also like, what are the like defining characteristics of the best kinds of leaders versus the worst kinds of leaders?
Right. So our belief is that the best kinds of leaders are those leaders who are able to inspire the best in people, to enable things like loyalty, enable things like extra mile, enable people to realize when they're in the wrong job and elect to move. People who are able to act in alignment with their value system, who feel like they fit in and they're contributing and they are doing their best work. Right? And leadership is really important, especially trust. So this is one of the key things that we talk about in leadership is to what degree do your people trust you as a leader? And trust is important for a few reasons, but at least kind of the main ones are if people trust you, they are much more likely to not be reserved in what they're doing. Right? So they are much more likely to support you, to not have to email everything in triplicate when they commit to something and you commit to something. You trust one another to do it. And in other words, it makes the whole organization function more effectively and more efficiently. The second thing about trust is high trust environments are places that people want to work these days. Right? So you get lots of trust barometers. Nobody wants to work in an environment where people are stabbing each other in the back. And it's really critical for organizations to develop trust, which incidentally it goes hand in glove with accountability. Hence, very low trust in lots of organizations, right? And you can't trust people who are going to act in alignment with their needs and in alignment with their own self-interest. So we try to talk to people about how do you act in alignment with your value system, as opposed to your needs or what is expedient for you. And the third thing is that you can't really lead change if people don't trust you. Imagine you've got a group of 100 people to follow you on a difficult path. And you've convinced them that this is the right path, etc. But then suddenly you realize that the path has changed. You now need to turn left. If people don't trust you, it's extremely difficult to get them to turn left, right? And organizations spend millions on massive change programs trying to get people to buy in. One of my favorite kind of terms, buy into the change, right? If people trust you, the requirement for the so-called buy-in is so much less, right? In other words, I can simply say to you, take the work that you and I do together. Because I have a great deal of trust in you as a piano teacher, if you said to me, I know that I said we were going to play this piece, but now I think we should play something different, I simply take your word for it. In other words, I give you permission to lead in that process. Whereas if I didn't trust you, I would be constantly thinking, well, why did he say that? What's his ulterior motive? What's going on here? I'm getting change fatigue. I don't want to change, etc. All of these things. So, trust in leadership is absolutely critical. And for us, that's an absolutely defining characteristic of a good leader, is someone who is trusted in their leadership role by others in the organization.
Okay. So if you had to flip that on its head now and define like the worst kind of leader, and I mean, I'm sure that you can find these like a dime a dozen around, right? Versus the good kind.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the best kind of leader, demonstrating care, doing what is appropriate, in other words, acting in alignment with their value system, as opposed to acting in alignment with their needs, and in doing so, enabling the best in others. Well, the worst leaders are simply the exact opposite. The worst leaders don't care about the human beings behind the human resources. They see everyone as a means to their end, as opposed to being an end in themselves. And they act almost flawlessly in alignment with their own needs. Right? You know, they almost become predictable in their selfishness. The worst leaders. And Liam, what is really fascinating is if you go around in today's world and you ask leaders what their job is, they typically tell you that their job is to get results out of people. In other words, if I ask a sales manager, what is your job? Well, it's to hit the sales targets. Now, our belief turns that on its head completely. Our belief is, as a sales manager, your job is to enable the best in a sales team. Mm. In other words, it's much more important to consider what you're given to enable the best in the team than it is to constantly have your eye on what you're getting out of the team. Practically, that means in our check-in meeting, I'm asking the question, how can I help people? As opposed to what happens in a typical sales meeting, which is I ask everyone whether they've hit their targets. I mean, do you see the difference, right?
It's like night and day, actually. And this is obviously very useful for me as the leader of the company. So I really appreciate these insights. You mentioned transparency and trust just now. How much transparency? It's interesting, you know, if you think about something like the legacy media, people are just losing faith in legacy media. I'm one of them. I can't bear to read anything on News 24, for example. I mean, I'm just like, the propaganda bells just start ringing, and it's because of their lack of transparency. And then you look at someone like Tucker Carlson, who's like, you know, leading like news in the US after getting fired from Fox News. And all he cares about is the truth. And people have responded like tenfold to the way that they respond to the legacy media, to Tucker Carlson, who's now taking over like news on Twitter. So like, how much transparency in your view is like important when garnering trust?
I have a kind of maybe counter view on this one. And I can't comment on Tucker Carlson. I just don't know enough about the individual situation. But my view is that transparency and trust are almost, in some ways, opposites. The less trust you have, the more transparency you require. The more trust you have, the less transparency you require.
Right. I see.
Right. You know, if you really trust the media, or if you trust, let's say you trust a certain reporter, all they've got to do is say to you, I have my sources. And you go, okay, fair enough. In the past, you've had your sources, and that's always turned out to be good. And I know you're the kind of person who wouldn't lie, and you have your, you know, again, coming back to this kind of values orientation, you have your orientation in a sound value system, so I'm going to believe you. If you doubt somebody, or if you think there's going to be propaganda, etc., then you've got to start asking the question, or you don't have to start, but you do start asking the question, well, who are your sources? Oh, you won't tell me your sources. There must be some sort of ulterior motive. So now, because I don't have trust, what I require is transparency. Not because the transparency is going to build trust, incidentally, but because the transparency is going to be a substitute for trust.
I see. So, okay. How do we protect ourselves from this? You know, I know that you're pressed for time, so I just want to kind of get down to some practical advice here. You know, let's say someone is applying for a job and they're listening to this, how can they protect themselves from this form of bad leadership? How can they identify a bad leader off the bat? Because obviously, like, there's a certain veil involved. I'm sure that, you know, especially the bad leaders are reading all sorts of wonderful books that teach them how to kind of deceitfully act on their intentions. So, you know, how can we protect ourselves from these bad leaders? Just to quickly preface it with a story, a very good friend of mine the other day was called in with the rest of his team. He's just moved recently to Amsterdam, and he works in paid media, and essentially, like, his whole team, who was getting paid very well, was just called in, and they were all let go. Like, the whole team, they're like, we're sorry, but you know, the company is looking at restructuring and hiring people locally. There's no point in having people who work, you know, in our region on things happening abroad. And they were all let go instantly, no questions asked. And then, you know, the company tried not to even give them severance packages as well. So they tried to let them go with nothing. And, you know, this came as such a shock to me. I just thought to myself, wow, I mean, firstly, thank God I'm a business owner and I don't have to work for anyone, so I don't have to deal with that kind of thing. But, like, what do you do in that case? You know, like, where do you even begin? How do we protect ourselves from ending up in situations like that, in your view?
Yeah, Liam, in some ways, the bad leaders that we have are our own fault. Because, believe it or not, our typical response to people who are taking from us is not actually to give appropriately to them. Our typical response to people who are taking from us is to try to take from them. In other words, retaliation tends to be a more typical response than courage or being appropriate. Now, I could tell you several stories of where people have had managers who've done crazy things like that, and they have simply resigned on the spot. I can tell you equally lots of stories where people see their managers doing things like that, and so they spend the next few months trying to engineer a package, or they wait around trying to engineer a situation where they get their bonus. And then they resign. But the managers start to pick up on this, right? So then they start putting your bonus into 3-year tranches. So you can't do this. And what you end up with is a big game, right? I know that you are a manipulative manager, but they also know that you're a manipulative employee. And so the entire organization becomes basically a place where we can take from one another. And that obviously ends up being in a kind of toxic work culture where people are complaining about one another all the time, where customers, incidentally, are not getting what they want. And, you know, I worked in a factory we consulted in a factory where this take and take had got so bad that, you know, management was seen to be disrespectful and taking from the workforce, and the workforce was literally trying their best to sabotage management, to do as little as they could without being fired, even if that cost them their bonus, because at least it made sure that management didn't get a bonus either, right? And you just think about how crazy it is to reach a situation. And in that case, amazingly, the thing which I believe turned it around was sitting in a room full of managers and asking them to start saying hello to people, asking them to start showing an actual level of respect to their team, and listen to them and understand what their problems are and help sort out their issues and spend more time in the factory and less time looking at spreadsheets. And in 6 months, this is going to sound outrageous, but productivity in that facility doubled.
Wow.
Literally, because management and people started getting to be, you know, and the employees in the organization started getting onto the same side of the equation.
Yeah, no, that's actually quite remarkable. But to me, it makes sense. I totally align with you.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get back to your question though. So, what do you do if you have a toxic manager? And the short answer is, do what you know to be appropriate, which is one of two things. Either address the issue directly with the manager, point out what's going wrong, point out what they're doing, and ask for change, or in an extreme case, leave your organization or leave the job or leave the particular manager, right? And I mean, the only way most employees can hold someone accountable is by leaving, and in the interview, in the exit process, saying, "I've left because of this manager." And those managers in good organizations do get held accountable ultimately. I'm not suggesting that you just run away from your problems. I think you should always address the issue first, directly with your manager, and then take it from there. Now, I say all of this with the proviso, and the kind of the proviso is, before you do any of this, make sure you're not the problem. Right? It is incredible how many people we encounter who go into work with an attitude of entitlement as opposed to an attitude of generosity. And they start the process believing that their manager is wrong and their manager is not doing, but they never look back and think, am I actually reaching the standard? Am I doing my best? Am I collaborating with my colleagues? Or am I simply acting in my own best interest and literally inspiring the worst in my manager?
Right. Flipping it around again on the side of the manager, you've spoken before about giving constructively versus just giving in like a charitable sense. Maybe you could go into that a bit, because I find that personally fascinating. I made a video recently, just a short clip about how you can give with no, how you can bless people with no, how you can give and bless people by removing yourself from their company, because ultimately you're giving them the opportunity to reflect on what they've done. You're giving them the opportunity to change by doing that, and showing them the error of their ways without having to incriminate yourself or become violent. And this seems to be quite a big part about, or at least of what you guys do when you're teaching leaders, is to teach them about these different types of giving. So maybe you can just give us a rundown. I
mean, broadly speaking, Liam, we see two types of giving. The first type of giving is giving with generosity, and that is the kind of giving that springs into most people's minds. Right? The second kind of giving is a giving with courage. Now, giving with generosity means rising above the loss or potential loss of things. Acting with courage means rising above the loss or the potential loss of self. Now, if you ask yourself which of those two things is more difficult, it's obvious that the second is more difficult. Right? And in fact, most people have much less of an issue with giving with generosity than they do giving with courage. And this, I think, is one of the key, the key points in all of this is giving with courage or giving with generosity is not a skill. It's a choice. And if you make the choice to give with generosity when you should give with courage, that's on you. If you make the choice to give somebody another chance when actually what you need to do is call them up on their behavior, that's on you. Right? If you walk into a room, Liam, and you start shouting at people and abusing people, and bullying, the appropriate give is not a quiet, Liam, let's have a chat about this, and I really don't think it's a nice way for you to talk to people, etc. The appropriate give here is, Liam, this is unacceptable, and if this happens again, it's going to go to the next point. I will not tolerate bullies in the organization. Now, why don't people do that? Yeah, well, courage is overcoming fear, and generosity is overcoming greed, and it's easier to overcome greed than it is to overcome fear.
Well, if you think about it, you don't really own anything at the end of the day. You're not going to take any of it with you when you pass on from this life. If there's anything that you're going to take with you, it's your spirit and your emotions and thoughts and your experiences And I think that's where the giving of courage comes in. It's like you have to sacrifice a part of that, which you very much own. Like if someone has millions and millions of dollars, for them to give you, you know, whatever in material terms might not even be that much of a charitable giving, you know, by any standard. So
Yeah.
it also depends in that sense, right?
Yeah. You know, the other thing is that acting with courage requires you to stand up for something. And if you don't know what you stand for, then that is going to be a massive inhibitor for you, right? It's going to mean that you can't act with courage because you simply don't know when courage is appropriate.
How do you gain that lens? With like is it just through experience ultimately, or do you think that it can be learned?
You know, we have a kind of view that you know, you shouldn't have to send people on a course to learn values. Right? Values are something that some people grow up with, that others learn over time. But essentially, we develop our value system on the basis of how the world looks to us and how we behave in the world and the choices that we make. Do we really reflect positively on things? You know, we see three attentions, Liam. The first attention is I'm here to get. And in that attention, when you're born, you know, literally you have nothing to give. And all you're concerned with is what you're getting. When you start to get a bit older, you realize that if you smile, you get a biscuit. If you keep quiet, you get a hug. If you cry, you get put out of the room. In other words, you realize that the world is manipulable. And so you start to manipulate the world with increasing levels of sophistication as you get older. I'll never forget my daughter saying to me, "Dad, can I?" Mom said she started with a very good, very persuasive phrase. Mom had gone out and she said, "Mom said I could have some hot chocolate." So I said to her, "Are you sure?" She said, "Yes. Look, there's the hot chocolate on the counter." She was about 3 or 4 years old at the time. So I said to her, "Okay, fine. I'll make you some hot chocolate. It looks like that's probably true that Mom has given you this, but you're not going to sit here and watch TV and do all sorts of things, right? So drink your hot chocolate. We're going to watch whatever I'm watching, which was, I think, the news or something." And so she sat next to me and she sipped her hot chocolate extremely slowly. If you can imagine a 3-year-old with this level of kind of self-control. So I looked at her and I said, "Isabel, this is not okay. You know, you need to finish your hot chocolate. And because I said to you, when it's finished, you're going to bed." So she jumps off the couch, she walks over to the kitchen counter and she puts down half a hot chocolate on the top, on the counter. So I said to her, "What are you doing? Do you not want the rest?" She said, "No, I'm saving it for after I've finished playing." In other words, you told me that after the hot chocolate, I have to go to bed. Yeah. But I'm just not going to finish the hot chocolate. Now, Liam, what's amazing about that is she was right. My response, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, was, "Isabel, that's not in the spirit of our agreement." Yeah, right. to a 3-year-old, you're going to bed anyway. But you see how you can you reach a point where you are now manipulating the world, right? And you are in other words, you're giving in order to get.
Yeah, is that even
quite a different thing, right? Yeah, I mean that's the second attention. The third attention, you're here to give. In other words, your giving becomes unconditional. You're giving to something which you believe is greater than the get. And we call those things for which we are willing to be unconditional. We call those things values, right? In other words, I'm willing to be honest, even if it's detrimental to me, as an example. I'm willing to be courageous, even if it means I get fired, because I'm less concerned with being fired than I am with doing the right thing. In other words, I'm more concerned with what I'm giving than what I'm getting. And for us, that's a sign of, that's a sign of maturity. And it doesn't, unfortunately, come with experience. There are plenty of people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s who are still focused primarily on what they're getting, as opposed to what they're giving in the world.
It's a sad thing. Do you think that we shouldn't give to get? Isn't it better to give even if it's to get?
Motive is everything. And Liam, there are actually two kinds of there are two types of getting, right? There is taking and there's receiving. Now, taking is problematic because taking puts you in conflict with the world. Receiving is absolutely fine because receiving puts you on the same side as the rest of the world, right? In other words, if somebody's trying to give you something and you receive it gratefully, both people experience something positive. Whereas if you start trying to take, then you put yourself in conflict with the other. So we have no problem with receiving. The issue is with taking. And when you act in alignment with your values, you end up receiving. I'm sitting next to a lovely instrument, right? And I would hope that this instrument comes from the proceeds of people who found what we do valuable and were happy to part with their hard-earned cash for the insights that we share with them and the work that we do in their organizations. It's when you take and the other person responds without willingness, that's when it becomes a problem. And that's what's happening in so many organizations, right? It's not give and receive, it's give and take.
Yeah, that is a statement that I'm familiar with. It's interesting you bring the piano into it, because I would say if the former is true and they've created that instrument purely with the profit of selling it in mind, or selling the parts or whatever it may be, I mean, that will be heard in the end result. Similarly, these things I think can be felt and sensed, especially when we lean into them. It's interesting that you got a bit more esoteric and spoke about like the manipulating of the fabric of reality. I didn't really expect that when I brought you on, although that kind of thing I would love to go deeper into when we next talk, because those are the things that interest me truly. I know that you have at 5 o'clock, so I think we should wrap it up here. I feel like this is a really good and succinct little showcase to potential leaders and also people who are just finding their way and wondering where they should align themselves. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you and your time. And yeah, I hope that you, in looking back on this, will consider coming on again, because I think there's a lot more for us to discuss and far more in depth just based on this.
Yeah, well, Liam, thank you for having me. And it's an interesting conversation as always. I mean, I think that one of the reasons I'm happy to have this conversation with you is because my experience of you has been quite aligned with this. I think that you, and this is why I think a lot of what we talk about resonates. It feels while we are in a lesson together, like your interest is in what you can teach, as opposed to what you can get out of the student. What you can enable in the student rather than which is why I feel this works. So yeah, thank you.
It's a pleasure. Just on a final note, my teachers have given me that, and by their example, I feel obliged to continue that. And I think that shows the strength of that type of leadership, that it carries forward as well.
Yeah. I mean, in our words, giving begets giving and taking begets taking. And one of the reasons that we work with leaders on this journey of enabling a shift from taking to giving is because our belief is leaders need to make the change first. And when leaders start to focus on what they can give rather than what they get out of people, then people start to trust them, and then people can start to focus on what they're giving. rather than being consistently concerned with what they are getting. And what you end up with is a much more productive and frankly much happier, much more enabled organization as a result. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
That's a cut. That beautiful, Ian. Thank you so much.